I began the Friday video by saying that extreme weather or extreme track variables aside, this should be a walkover weekend for McLaren-Mercedes, an easy 1-2. The car was that good on Friday. And I still stand by that. I think the car was still that good on Sunday, except that they didn't win. And that just underlines the quality of the drive we saw today from Max Verstappen in the Red Bull Honda. I thought it was interesting on the slowdown lap, Lando Norris, delighted, of course, to be P2, to change a little bit the dynamic at McLaren, with Oscar on this occasion finishing third in the other McLaren, thanking the team for the performance, but then saying we just didn't have the pace today. Well, I don't buy that. They definitely had the car to win this Grand Prix, but it all went away with Lando's qualifying performance, and then it went away for Oscar Piastri at the first corner. Oscar, as kind of predicted, on the clean side of the road, made a very, very good start, as did George Russell behind him, also on the clean side of the road in P3, and Max Verstappen bogged down on the dirty side of the grid. And as they pulled away, Oscar appeared to have the lead, and George Russell got up to second place. If you look at the telemetry, the timing and the telemetry, he's in second place long before they get to that first chicane. Problem is, he's on the inside behind Oscar Piastri. I say the problem, that's normally where you would expect the pace to be. Oscar's leading the race, Max is being squeezed out on the outside, and there's George right behind him. But the problem is, as I say, that Oscar Piastri, having got the lead and made a good start, then I think just thought, well, this is easy now. I'll just brake a little bit earlier going into turn one, make sure there are no incidents. And as he's doing this, George Russell behind him is having to feather the throttle in order not to run into the back of Oscar. And when Oscar comes out of the throttle, he does so before he actually hits the brake pedal. And at this moment, on the outside, Max Verstappen is going 30 kilometers an hour quicker than Oscar Piastri going into turn one. And guess what? He's kind of on the racing line now, and he just goes straight in and chooses a bit of road between Oscar and what is going to be a diminishing gap going into the apex curve, chooses that gap and goes through. Well, probably a couple of millimeters either side. Absolutely perfect. Oscar does nothing to stop it, partly because he wasn't even expecting it. And I think he was completely surprised that Max was there. And then behind him, of course, George Russell is irate, thinking, what is Oscar doing braking so early going into turn one? It was just the most brilliant, opportune pass you'll ever see in Formula One. Superb work by Max Verstappen. And at that point, of course, the whole texture of the race immediately changed, because on these soft Pirellis, the C6 that they ran in qualifying is the softest Pirelli tyre ever seen since they've been in Formula One. And on the medium tyre on which the front runners were starting, it was going to be a very difficult race for anybody who wasn't in front on free air and in a position, therefore, to keep the tyres relatively cool. And Oscar Piastri, in the space of just a second or so, suddenly went from being the pole winner and the leader of the race in a position to look after the tyres and control the pace of the race in what was patently the best car, to a driver now that was behind Max Verstappen and having to look after the temperatures of the tyres on the McLaren. But still, he had a real opportunity. There are two DRS zones at Imola. But guess what? The straights at Imola are not really long enough between the chicanes and the corners for DRS really to make a difference. That's what makes Imola such a great race circuit, in my opinion. And Oscar, although he was definitely quicker than Max, and he did start to close a gap that Max had opened out over the first couple of laps, as he's so good at doing, then started to run into trouble with his tyres and got onto the radio saying, I don't think a one-stop strategy is going to work. And McLaren then went into two-stop strategy mode, I guess thinking then at that point, yeah, we still got the best car. Oscar Piastri's driving never better. For sure, Max Verstappen will come in as well. It looks as if we're doing the undercut. He came in as early as lap 13 to switch to a new set of hard tyres now from the mediums on which he started the race. And he had another new set of hards in the garage, so no problem there. But the real issue was that he was released at that point into a massive amount of traffic. And on that new set of hards, he was unable to make any sort of ground on Max. So forget any thought of an undercut. This was a two-stop strategy in what very quickly became, obviously to everyone in the pit lane, a one-stop strategy race that Max Verstappen was running on free air. And I think at this point, McLaren suddenly thought, what have we done here? This should have been our race. We've got the better car. Max has got the lead. We should still be able to win it. But the way to win it was not to go to that two-stop strategy and to put him out in the traffic. The way to win it was just to sit there behind Max and hope that something would happen as the race went longer. But they didn't do that. I think they over-strategized this one at McLaren. I think that was the problem for Oscar Piastri's race today. It was just over-strategized and not enough looking at what was actually going on, because these two were just walking away from the rest of the field. George Russell took a lot of time out of Lando Norris in the early phase of the race, made it difficult for Lando to get him. Eventually, Lando, just showing how good the McLaren was, passed George on the outside going into the first chicane. So that was easy for him. But when Oscar came in, it was then Max Verstappen with something like 10 seconds over Lando Norris. A perfect position for Max. And whenever Lando went quickly, Max just matched him because his tyres were just in great shape. He'd been looking after them so well in that free air. So the only thing then, as Lando said on the radio quite clearly, the way for me to do this race is to be in free air and to go for as long a stint as possible. And he did that in the hope, of course, that there would be some sort of safety car or virtual safety car intervention. And there was a virtual safety car on this occasion. Esteban Ocon ground to a halt in the Haas Ferrari on the rise up out of Tosa on the left. And they put out the virtual safety car, which is good to see. Much fairer, I think, than the safety car, which is a bit crass in Formula One. It's often deployed just to bring the race closer together again. But there's a VSC on this occasion. That was a good one. And the problem was that came out just 2 laps after Lando Norris had stopped for his new set of hard tyres. So he was now in trouble in terms of the race to Max Verstappen. From Max's point of view, what would have been a 27 pit stop about at Imola, a very long pit lane here, the longest on the Formula One calendar, was reduced to about a 17-second pit stop. So by the time the virtual safety car came in, and with Oscar Piastri also stopping within the VSC and going to his second set of hard tyres, by the time it came in, Max Verstappen had a race-winning margin over Lando Norris, partly because of the way he'd ground Oscar Piastri into taking that early stop, partly because of the virtual safety car, and partly because of how consistently well he'd driven the Red Bull. No errors anywhere, just maximizing it within the envelope of what he wanted to do with the tyre management on every lap. Just brilliant to watch. So now Max had something like an 18-second lead, 18.7, 18.5 lead over Lando Norris. And they're both on new hard tyres. So here again, you would have thought the McLaren would start to eke away at that lead, but it didn't happen. Max matched everything that Lando did at this phase of the race. And again, I have to underline, I think the McLaren was the better car, but not by a margin that was going to allow Lando to close the gap. A 20-second, 18-second margin was too much. That's much too much of a difference between the two. So then it looked as if Max Verstappen, by dint of that first corner pass, and then obviously the break that came with the VSC, was going to win at Imola with a massive margin. Except that another car stopped coming out of Tosa. On this occasion, it was Kimi Antonelli, who had had an early battle with Lewis Hamilton, holding off Lewis Hamilton for quite a lot of laps. I wonder what Lewis thought about that. He started on the hard tyre, Charles Leclerc on the medium, like everybody else, but Lewis is on the hard. And Antonelli was also on the hard. So it was a straight race in the early laps, and Antonelli was in front of Lewis, and there's no way Lewis was going to get past him. It was, I don't know what that was. That was in the context, I guess, of Carlos Sainz being quickest in Q2 yesterday when the Ferraris failed to make it into Q3. I guess this was another thing of Lewis staring at the back of the car he used to drive in front of the Italian Ferrari crowd. Anyway, we'll get on to Lewis because there's a nice ending to the Lewis Hamilton day at Imola. Anyway, on this occasion, they didn't deploy the VSC, even though it appeared as if Antonelli's car stopped in about the same place as Esteban Ocon's Haas. I think the FIA will probably say, oh no, on this occasion it was more difficult to get rid of the Mercedes because it wasn't as near the entry point for the guardrail and things like that. I'm sure there'll be some sort of bona fide excuse for it. But I think to the casual observer, 2 cars stopping in about the same place, one resulting in a virtual safety car, one resulting in a safety car, bunching together the race when the leader is out there by 20 seconds, definitely looks a bit suspicious. Anyway, everybody came in for tyres except Charles Leclerc, who gained track position, which he'd lost with the virtual safety car thing, and the Aston Martins, who had also lost time. Fernando Alonso complaining about, I think he said something like, I'm the unluckiest driver in Formula One ever, or something like that. I would dispute that. I mean, obviously, he hasn't had the greatest of luck throughout his career, Fernando, but it was a little bit of an outburst unnecessary. Anyway, because of that, they didn't bring either Fernando or Lance Stroll in for the second safety car. They left them out there to gain track position that they'd lost in the VSC. But everybody else came in, except, of course, Oscar Piastri, who'd gone onto this 2-stop strategy. His tyres were 11 laps old, and he didn't have any more in the garage. There's nothing else he could do. He had to stay out on that second set of used hard. So it was Max Verstappen now with Oscar Piastri behind, having got that track position in the safety car, with Lando Norris behind him now, like Max, on a new set of hard tyres. And as they're going around behind the safety car, Lando Norris got on the radio when they're behind the safety car and said, and started waffling a bit about, well, guys, obviously, I don't want any team orders. I don't want to be, but Oscar is on the older tyres, and if I'm going to have to go out win this race, it'd be good if I have a bit of a clear track. All this sort of thing going on, and I have to say, Cameron, when I do the live chats with Cameron before Imola, said to me, what do you think the dynamic at McLaren is now? And I said, well, I think if there's a situation where he hasn't got much to lose and he can score a lot of points within the team, he's got such a comfortable points lead now, or relatively comfortable, that Oscar Piastri in that situation will probably let Lando pass. He score a lot of points within the team. They're not going for the win. It was for second place. Maybe he could have beaten Max. And I thought Oscar would probably let him pass. And I said that at that moment live when it was happening in Imola. But he didn't. Oscar stayed in front of Lando for as long as he could. And I suppose what I'd forgotten was that Oscar is actually a very gritty Australian racing driver. And he wasn't that slow anyway on those 11-lap-old hard tyres. Yes, he was slow relative to Max. Max pulled away basically absolutely perfectly, about a second a lap for the first 4 or 5 laps after the safety car came in. It was just a case study on revitalized concentration, on doing the job perfectly. I mean, he was quicker. He was purple in places like Sector 2, and he went on to set fastest race lap, basically, while Oscar Piastri was holding up Lando Norris. But Lando wasn't doing enough to assert his position. He did eventually. After 2 or 3 laps, he got him with DRS going into turn 1 on the outside. Again, that the McLaren is that good, and started to pull away from Oscar. But the minute that happened, that's when Max set his fastest lap. Just head down, focus on the job, did it perfectly, and won the race. I'm still completely staggered that he did win this Grand Prix against those 2 McLaren-Mercedes on this circuit. It was a win of racecraft. It was a win of superb driving under pressure, consistently superb driving under pressure. And it will be, I don't know how many times we say it now in terms of great poles or great wins. This was one of the best. Certainly that overtake into turn 1 was as good as you're going to see this side of, I don't know what, Nigel Mansell on PK87 Silverstone. It was that good. It was just that. It was just reflex, like Nigel's was at Silverstone. Just reflex action. Piastri's down the inside. He's going to take it easy. Bam, down the outside, got him. And of course, there's, if you think about it, think about the risk at that point. If you were Max Verstappen driving that car, you'd think, oh, what if Oscar comes across, got the whole field behind me? Maybe there'll be a drama. We've already had some dramas already. There'll be another thing. Yeah. But none of that. Clear head, straight through, bang, took the lead. It just blew I think everybody except Max's mind was blown by that. Absolutely amazing performance. So Lando Norris finished second. As I say, he'll be delighted with that because he beat Oscar Piastri, kind of. I mean, it was a strategy thing. I think they over-strategized Oscar's race, as I say. Oscar was third, which won't, displease him because he was quick and he didn't get the best of safety cars and everything else. Probably the wrong strategy. And of course, he's still leading the World Championship, so that's a good thing. But 4th place, Lewis Hamilton. I mean, he'd found himself stranded a little bit after the virtual safety car stop when he went to mediums from the hards on which he started the race. It was a logical thing to go to mediums at that point. And he was very quick for a while, passing some of the midfield traffic. By the time he got past there, the tyres had gone off. And Charles, who was on the hard tyre at that point, passed Lewis and started to pull away. But then, of course, the safety car came out. And that changed things because they left Charles out there. But then, of course, on a new set of hards, it was relatively easy for Lewis to get ahead of Charles. And his race for a while was with Alex Albon, who was also on a new set of hards on the Williams. And Alex had been P3 for a while after the virtual safety car period. And Oscar Piastri got him in about 5 laps. Of course, he was always going to do that. But Alex Albon drove really well in the Williams Mercedes, as did Carlos Sainz. And Lewis had a big drama with him going into turn 1, lots of dramatic stuff there. But eventually it was Lewis that did get the better of Albon and finished in P4 for Ferrari, going very quickly over the last 5 or 6 laps of the race, bringing the Tifosi to their feet on all the hills and surrounding areas, spectator areas around Imola. And when Ferrari fans get going, it's something to see. So that was good. I mean, Lewis was able to wave to the crowd on his slowdown lap and feel as if he'd done a good day's work. The question is, of course, and this is sort of the James Hunt thing, well, why was he only quick at the end of the race when his adrenaline was up and he was doing all that passing on a new set of tyres? Why was it only then? Where was he in qualifying? Where was he in the early laps of the race? And so that's the problem at Ferrari. When the car goes that well, and Lewis Hamilton finishes 4th, you wonder why they didn't get through to Q3. That was the problem. What happened in qualifying was the problem for Ferrari. Yes, you could say, yeah, ray of light now. Good drive by Lewis. And Charles Leclerc, of course, who also had his own drama with Alex Albon, was completely despondent after the race, given the way it had gone for him. And he won't be happy at all. But it's all to do with the whole atmosphere at Ferrari at the moment and where they're going with the car and where it's going with the two drivers as well. I'm not sure this result will necessarily clear their minds before getting to Monaco next weekend. Although Monaco, of course, is such a specialised circuit, it's all about qualifying, that maybe anything can happen there. Maybe the Ferrari will be incredibly quick. Who knows? But yeah, a confusing result for Ferrari, I would say. A great ending to the weekend for Lewis Hamilton. He can smile and wave to the crowds, as I say, but not one that I think will make a lot of sense when they're waking up at Maranello on Monday morning and trying to analyse exactly what happened. Quick look at some of the other results. Very good drive. Alex Albon, as I say, to P5. Charles Leclerc 6. George Russell 7th. Got the worst of the virtual safety car with his pit stops. Drove like crazy in a car that was very, very difficult to drive. And again, you wonder how he managed to qualify third in that car, whereas Ferrari didn't even get into Q3. When you see the way the race worked today, you see my point. Carlos Sainz 8th, so points for both Williams, Mercedes, very good. Isaac Hadjar yet again into the points in the Racing Bulls, and Yuki Tsunoda, who had his share of wheel bashing as well, particularly with Carlos Sainz, got away with it too. Amazingly, actually, I thought he'd get a penalty for nerfing Carlos going into the first chicane. The final point scorer in the other Red Bull, P11, Fernando Alonso, be very, very annoyed with that, I would have thought. Nico Hülkenberg, journeyman Formula One driver, if ever there was one, P12, and 13th for Pierre Gasly. Very disappointing day for Alpine with Colapinto down in 16th place and having had that enormous shunt as well. So what a day. Roll on Monaco. As I say, it'll be a completely different thing there. It'll just be about qualifying, who can get to the front of the grid there. In theory, should be McLaren, but if anything, it'd be more open at Monaco than it was at Imola. So expect a surprise. It could be a George Russell. It could, of course, be a Max Verstappen. But in terms of the best package, still the odds favour McLaren-Mercedes. Quick word before we close, just to remind you that if you go to the description below this video, you'll see the reference to RAC watches and the discount you can have if you order a watch from REC. And of course, the watch we're featuring is the Senna Lotus 98T chassis number 4 Renault Turbo watch. And it's called that because it actually uses some of the aluminium from the original parts of that car in the tachymeter of the watch. Massively detailed, very, very painstaking design and construction, Swiss made as well. A beautiful, beautiful timepiece, remembering Ayrton, the last of the black and gold Lotuses as well. So, as I say, you can order that with a discount by mentioning the word Peter. All the details in the description below this video. So thanks for watching. A big thanks to Jetcraft, to REC Watches, to Track Ninja, and of course to OEM Exclusive for their support of this channel. That's the first part of this triple header over. Monaco next weekend.